What are you saying then?
I said I don't know if France is a monarchy. If they are not a monarchy, I do not
Okay,
believe that
calm
there is a
down, just
principality.
relax. Dude. That
Yes,
cortisol
I just
spike
want
is
to make
crazy
it
right
clear.
there. But look, I mean, to be fair though, the fact you don't know that is actually pretty interesting to me. Like that's really
Oh
interesting.
yeah,
But
I
let's
appreciate.
talk about I don't know England, right?
Uh huh.
UK, yeah.
Yep. United Kingdom. Yep. That's where I'm from. I live there.
Yeah, so okay, you're in the voice call, gotcha, cool. Alright. But what about unicorns? Do you believe that unicorns exist?
I don't believe the unicorns exist.
Okay. Is it true that all unicorns have a meat size of 6 inches?
That's true. Given that there are no unicorns. Yeah, it's vaguely true.
Okay, good. I had to test your logic skills for a second. Okay, got you. So now I'm
Lol.
going to present the
Right.
argument as to why that's the case. That it is actually true that the position that you have entails a contradiction. Right. There you go. I'm going to copy and paste the argument. Just give me 1 sec. Do, 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 do. Oh, do, do, do. Oh, here we go.
All
So of
right.
course
Let's
the
start
argument is
reading.
logically valid, right? Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do one of two things. You're going to want to say the argument is uninteresting and then run it from the conversation because you don't have an objection to try to optically grandstand, or you're going to actually not do this because I've already predicted this low-tier Jedi mind trick strategy that dumb fucks like you pull off and actually engage with the argument, which in any case, you'd not be attacking the inference of the argument or the inference structure of the argument, given the fact the argument is syntactically valid. So that means you'd have to reject one of the premises of the argument. Which one of the premises would that be, retard?
Yeah. Let me just read it. So it says, if an object possesses the divine nature, it is omnipotent. If an object possesses the human nature, it is not omnipotent. It is true that there exists an object that possesses both the divine and human nature. And so there exists an object that is both omnipotent and not omnipotent.
Okay. Is the argument valid?
Yeah, it's valid. I mean, yeah, obviously.
Okay, okay, good, good. No blunders so far. So which premise do you reject?
Premise two.
Okay, so let's see what premise 2 states. If an object possesses the human nature, it is not omnipotent. You reject that proposition, retard?
Uh, yeah, I don't think that's true.
Oh. Okay, so just a second, right? You'd agree that human nature is going to be all the things which makes a human, correct? Like the relevant things which makes a human, correct?
Yeah, I take it that the human nature is the set of properties that describe
Answer
what a
my
human.
question?
I was giving my
Yes, right?
definition
Gotcha.
of human nature.
So,
Yeah.
so one of these properties are going to be something related to biology, right? Biological species.
Uh, I don't think that's how it's understood by Christians.
Oh, really? You don't think that's how it's understood by Christians? So, how do you think Christians understood human nature?
From what I know, they understood human nature to refer to like rational animality.
Rational animality. So, it's going to be a feature of animals, which is rational. So, an animal which possesses a rational soul is going to be a human. And this animal understood physically,
Sorry, what
not
did you say?
biological. Yeah,
What?
so the way in which you're saying the Christians understand the human to be is just going to be the type of thing which involves a rational soul, right, which an animal possesses. So any animal which possesses a rational soul is going to be the type of thing which is a human, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
probably.
and now is animal the type of thing which is a biological feature of the world?
Yeah, animals are biological categories.
Okay, so that means animals are going to be physical things, correct?
I'm not clear on what you mean by physical.
Like physical, in this COVID context, I'm talking about the types of things which has some spatiotemporal extensionality.
The sorts of things that have spatio-temporal extensionality.
Yep, not a very confusing concept, right? But if you're a dumb
I
fuck,
mean,
you might be about
if
this.
that's how
So
you're
I had to break it down for
understanding,
you.
if
Mhm.
that's how you're understanding the term physical, then yeah, I suppose insofar as animals
Okay,
exist in
cool. So animals are physical. Human nature is gonna be the type of thing which is basically defined in virtue of the properties which makes a human a human. One of these properties being, or rather these properties being, a rational soul that's been assigned to an animal, and an animal is going to be the type of thing which is physical. So that means it is the case that it is embedded within the set of properties of a human nature that it would in fact be the case that it would be physical. Correct?
It would be the case that what the human nature is physical, or animals are
Yep.
physical.
The feature of the human nature. So the human nature is just going to be the set of all human properties. And within that set, you're going to have the element which is being physical. That's going to be entailed from all the concessions they've made this far.
Yeah, if you are a human, then you're physical under your view.
Okay, cool. So do you think that physicality is compatible with omnipotence?
Under your definition of physical, there doesn't seem to be a contradiction.
Oh, really? So what was my definition of physical?
Something that has spatio-temporal existence is what you said. Something that's spatially extended.
Okay. And so is it the case that an omnipotent being has maximal causal power?
Cash out maximal causal power. I'm not clear what you mean.
So that means it has causal sovereignty. So if a being is omnipotent, then it has causal sovereignty.
Yeah, you just went from like one vague gibberish term to another. Can you cash out what that means?
It's not even a vague gibberish term. It's just a matter if you have like a really pea-sized brain. So it's kind of like hard to understand from your perspective, but that's fine. I'm here to help out specialists like you anyways. So what I mean by causal sovereignty, just to clarify for the low tier like you, for example, is just to have causal power over all things which would exist.
Yeah, causal power over, like, okay, like I'll just make it clearer. What I'm
You don't
asking
know what
for
causal
is,
power?
what does it mean
Hmm.
to have causal power over all things that exist? As in, you can bring about any
That was what you asked
possible.
for. Right?
I wasn't done
You asked what
talking.
I mean to have maximal causal power. You asked me causal sovereignty.
I wasn't
Then I'm
done
going to ask
talking. I wasn't done talking.
you weren't
What I'm
done yapping.
unclear on,
You want to agree with
you
me,
went
definitely.
from, sorry, you went from
You
maximal
have to
causal
apologize.
power to causal sovereignty to having causal power over all things. And I don't think this is giving me a reductive or like a reducible
I
infinity
thought that
conclusion.
you weren't
What I'm
that
asking
retarded
for,
to the point you have to clarify what
what I'm
causal power
asking
means, but
for,
that's fine.
what I'm asking
Causal
for,
power is just the
what I'm
power to
asking
cause.
for, what I'm
The power to
asking
cause.
for,
The
what
power
I'm
to cause.
asking for. Sorry, I wasn't done.
Yeah, I know what
You
you're
know what
asking
I'm
for. Just answer
asking
the
for.
question. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, like I'm not gonna sit here and let the guy talk over me. It's just not
Are
how
you
it's
gonna
gonna
answer
work.
my point?
I mean, I'm trying to. I just don't know what you're trying to say. When you give a definition of something, you don't want to use the term you're defining. So if I say, what do you mean by causal sovereignty? And you say maximal causal power or the ability to call, or what's it called? Causal power over all things. That's not really telling me what you mean by maximal causal power. I want to know what it means to cause something.
So it's gonna be the
So
case. You don't know what it means to cause something. So that's what you're confused about
I
cause.
don't know what you mean by
Cause is just going to
this.
be the type of thing which indicates some dependence relation. So a cause for something is a reason as to why something exists. Reason is going to be cashed out as the relevant object, which is going to be the type of thing that another object, which is dependent on that object, would rely on for it to even exist. Now that's going to
Okay,
be a
so
clear-cut understanding of the word cause. So
thank
are going
you
to
so
make a
much.
of excuses to not address the argument, are going to
Okay,
finally engage with the argument, considering that they've given you a clear-cut definition of the word cause, causal power, and causal sovereignty, respectively.
okay, wait. So now I know what causal power means, but what does it mean to have maximal causal power? What does it mean to have maximal standing and dependency relations,
I
such
went over that,
as
by the way, Steve, but you forgot. So I went over that. So after I defined causal power, I actually went back to the sovereignty point, which you forgot because you might have dementia. I actually said specifically that causal sovereignty is just going to be the type of thing which is going to involve any being with the relevant causal power, which I've defined a while ago, which would be in control of all other things. Can't say that's unclear because I defined all the
but
terms you've
wait, hold on.
mentioned
But
previously.
now you're deviating from causal. So when you say
Deviate.
in control of, I wasn't done deviating. When you say in control of, is that just to say that there is this being who counterfactually grounds the existence of all other beings, all other states of affairs? Is that what you mean by
Yep.
maximal causal power? Okay, and then you're asking me if God has maximal causal power in that sense.
Yep.
Um, I mean, I'm like largely agnostic, but we can say he does for the sake of
Oh,
argument.
you're agnostic on whether God, or you're agnostic on whether all things depend on God?
Uh, yeah, I mean,
Aren't you a
like
Christian?
actually, maybe in like a loose sense, sure.
Oh, so you don't know if it is the case that all things depend on God, right? In the
I said I'm
universe, in the actual
agnostic.
world.
Yeah,
As a
yeah,
Christian, right?
yeah.
Okay, cool. So just to be clear on a couple of other things, right? So since you're agnostic on that proposition, I'm going to ask you, what's your definition of omnipotence, right?
Um, I take omnipotence to be the power to bring about possible states of affairs.
So that means all beings are omnipotent because every being has the power to bring about some possible state of affairs, right?
When I say
That's
possible, I mean
retarded.
any. When I say possible, I mean any possible state of affairs. Just to be clear.
Okay, so modification, that's fine. All possible state of
It wasn't a
affairs. And by
modification.
possible, you're just talking about logical possibilities or what?
Um, I suppose by possible.
Confused? Are you
I
okay?
suppose by possible, I mean it's unclear. I mean, I feel like I'll be talking more so about metaphysical possibility, but then again, I'm unclear on the distinction between metaphysical and logical possibility to even begin with. So,
Yeah, I'm unclear on that distinction too. So why not just say logical possibility for the clarity of this conversation?
uh, because I don't want to say logical possibility, I lean more towards it being metaphysical in
Okay,
nature.
so
But is this
metaphysical
relevant to the
possibility.
argument
Okay,
that you
cool.
were presenting?
Okay, cool. So just to be clear,
Relevant to the
so you're
argument
going
you were
to
presenting?
text into metaphysical possibility, and it's
Is
going
this
to be
relevant to the
useless if
argument
I
you were
ask you what
presenting?
you mean by metaphysical possibility because you just agreed that you're unclear on the distinction. So I'm going to ask you this question: is there any metaphysical possibility which you are unable to actualize?
Are there any metaphysical? Well, I think we have to cash out what's meant by metaphysical possibility, obviously, before we even talk about what we're saying, because we might have a disagreement. But also,
Okay,
is this
sure.
relevant
So
to
what
the
do you
argument
mean by metaphysical
you were
possibility?
forwarding?
hmm
I was gonna say, is this
hmm
relevant to the argument you were forwarding, or are you just trying to get my
Of
position
course,
wrong?
it is relevant. Yes, definitely relevant.
In
So,
what way?
what metaphysical possibility are you not able to actualize, which makes it such that you are not omnipotent?
Well, just take it that metaphysical possibility quantifies over all possible worlds. I think it's the broadest alethic possibility. In which case, I mean, there are a variety of possible worlds that I cannot bring about. Suppose, for example, there exists a possible world where, I, do not exist, for example, um, and I've never existed, and nothing's ever existed that I exist in. Nothing related to me exists. Like, obviously, it's trivial that I would be unable to bring about such a possible state of affairs because in order for me to bring it about, I'd have to exist. But if I exist, I'd exist in the causal history of that world. And so, like,
Do
that's
you
like
think
a
it is possible for God to be in that same situation, so you just substitute you with God?
is it possible for God to be in that same? Not metaphysically, no.
Oh, why not?
It would be metaphysically impossible for that situation to move to God, but it would be metaphysically possible for such a world to exist that I can't bring
Yeah, I'm
about.
asking you why. Yeah, why?
Because I take God to be metaphysically necessary, where I'm just metaphysically contingent.
What about you, which makes it the case that you're not metaphysically necessary, but God is metaphysically necessary given your position?
Wait, sorry, repeat the question slowly. You're speaking kind of fast.
Yeah,
I'll write it
sure.
down.
So, what about you specifically, which makes it the case that you are not metaphysically necessary, but God is?
What about me makes it the case that I am not,
You are metaphysically contingent, but God is not.
but God is metaphysically necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I just take it that give insofar as God is independent and God is a ground, he's ungrounded on the
Of
ground.
all things?
He need not be the ground of all things in order to be metaphysically necessary.
So, what is it that's a sufficient condition for him to be metaphysically necessary if it's not being the ground of all things?
Insofar as he's independent, and they say,
He's independent. That means he's not caused by anything.
yeah, that's what I take independence to mean.
Okay. And so, do you believe it is the case that he's the uncaused cause of the universe?
In this possible world, yeah, I take causation and relations like that to be dyadic. So it could be possible that there is a world where he's not the uncaused cause of all things, insofar as he's not a cause of anything. But in this world, he is,
Okay.
yeah.
So, in this world, at the very least, he causes all things.
Sorry?
So, in this world, at the very least, he causes all things, correct?
I'm agnostic.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're agnostic on the proposition that God causes all things as a Christian. You're agnostic on the proposition that God grounds all things. You're agnostic on the proposition that, are you agnostic on the proposition that God is logically necessary?
I mean, it depends what you mean by logical necessity. I already told you I'm a bit unclear on what you mean.
Logical necessity is just going to be the type of thing, and a given fact which is going to be necessarily true given the axioms of classical logic.
Any given fact is going to be necessarily true given the axiom. So are you saying it's like entailed based on the concepts themselves, or is it entailed based on some sort of metalogical relationship?
Yeah, so first and foremost, don't ever do that again. You need to stop LARPing. That's the first thing, right? Because the other part would not be relevant, of course, to the question, to the point I just made. That's the first thing.
I mean, it would
Methodological
be.
relations are not going to be relevant to that part. Secondly, what I just mean there is you have a given proposition P in a given formal system, and that's derivable from a given axiom, let's say the LNC or the LOI or the LEM, right?
Okay,
Unless you know,
if you're
unless you don't
talking,
know what derivable means in the context of classical logic, right?
yeah, I mean, the methodological stuff would be relevant in the sense I'm understanding it. But aside from that,
You know what
if you mean
methodologic is?
derivation, I wasn't done. If you mean derivation, then no, I don't think God is logically necessary.
Okay, but you know that God is metaphysically necessary, right?
I take that claim, yeah.
Okay, but do you know that claim to be correct?
Depends what you mean by no. I mean, I'd say I know.
Okay, cool. So let's just be clear in a couple of things. So you know that God is not logically necessary, but you know that God is metaphysically necessary, yada yada yada. And by omnipotence, you're talking about being able to actualize all metaphysical possibilities, correct?
Uh, yeah, being able to bring about all metaphysically possible states of affairs, yeah.
So why is it the case that it is metaphysically impossible for there to be a state of affairs in which nothing exists?
I take it that God being independent entails that he exists in all metaphysically possible worlds. And so that just entails that
Why
it's
can't he just
impossible.
be independent only in the actual world and not in all worlds, including those state of affairs in which nothing exists?
Wait, what was
Why is
the
that
question? Repeat it one more time.
contradictory? Yeah, sure. So why is it the case that it is impossible why is it the case that God can't just be independent in the actual world, right? But there exists some state of affairs in which nothing exists. He would still have the property of being independent.
Wait, hold on.
So it's
So we are,
necessarily true. He's going to necessarily just to clarify before you respond. He's going to
yeah.
necessarily true. It's going to be necessarily true that God is independent, insofar as there exists a state of affairs in which God exists.
So is the question you're asking me is why can't it be the case that God is independent in some possible world, and yet, despite that, there exists another possible world where nothing exists, including God Himself?
What are you saying, sorry? Someone that's talking to me.
So is the question you're asking me why is it the case that God can be independent in a possible world, but then there exists another possible world where nothing exists? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking for the contradiction, right?
The contradiction is just based on my view of like how reality is and what objects have in terms of natures and stuff. Like I
It
take it
sounds like a
that
difficult belief. But remember that you said that what it means for God to be independent is just for it to be the case that God specifically is not dependent on all things. So he possesses the property of divine necessity, for example. And I'm telling you that even if you want to say that's an essential characteristic of God, which is fine, it's going to be essential insofar as God exists. But we're still trying to understand in virtue of what specifically would God necessarily exist under your model, to which you have to go back to the same property of divine necessity, which is a circular line of reasoning.
no, it would just be something like over and above the divine deity itself. It would be something like I take it that all objects are either grounded or ungrounded. Um, and the objects that are ungrounded, all objects are either grounded or ungrounded that exist or something. And then I just take it that objects that are ungrounded would trivially exist in all metaphysically possible worlds because there would be no explanation for why they do not
Why?
exist. There's nothing that grounds the non-existence of those things.
Wait. So let me just type out the argument as to why this is the case that ungrounded objects necessarily exist metaphysically, right? So let me just get it clear. So the premise of the argument is simply what, sorry? As to why that's going to be
Um,
necessarily true?
the argument for why ungrounded objects exist in all metaphysically possible
Necessarily, yeah.
worlds.
Yeah.
Let me think about premise one and premise two and premise and the conclusion. Will probably be something like, hmm. Actually, no, I'll just type out to prevent errors.
Okay.
Oh, you could just say something like this. Maybe you could say something like,
Take your time.
Mhm.
Have you thought of the argument yet?
I thought of like the sorts of principles I want to use for the argument. I'm just figuring out a way to say it in a way that's formal.
And just to be clear, you'd agree that for anything which is metaphysically impossible, there's some given metaphysical principle X which rules that proposition out from being true under any model, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Um,
So what's going to be the metaphysical principle that you're appealing to here?
I'm writing it out.
Okay. You're not using ChatGPT, right?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Mm, what do I want to say here? I mean, okay, no, I feel I could say something like this.
What is the difference between metaphysical necessity and logical necessity?
Okay, okay. People put a pen.
Stop. Someone mute that guy, please. Thank you.
Maybe something like this could work. You can take a read.
Okay, so let's read it out together. So, all propositions must have premise one to be in the, well, the metaphysical principle is to be independent is to not require a truth maker for one's existence. God is independent. God does not require a truth maker for one's existence. Some object fails to obtain if and only if his truth maker fails to obtain. God's truth maker never fails to obtain insofar as he does not have one. God never fails to obtain. What's the argument for premise one?
Definitional.
So you're saying that for an object to obtain, it has to be the case that there exists a truth maker?
That's the view that I'm taking right now. Yeah.
But then that would mean that God specifically, which you believe is independent, which does not have a truth maker, would require a truth maker given that agreement. So that's going to be contradictory.
You said, wait, repeat the question.
So you signed off on the fact that for an object to exist, it has to have a truth maker, but then you also agree that God does not have a truth maker in virtue of his independence. So that would be contradictory because you believe that God exists. That's
Hold
retarded.
on, wait. The question was, I thought the question was, an object fails to obtain if it lacks a truth maker.
So to be clear, you believe that it is the case that if an object fails to obtain, it does not have a truth maker?
What I put in the second premise or the second argument was some object fails to obtain if and only if its truth maker fails to obtain.
Okay, so why is there a biconditional relation?
That's also just definitional. Like these are just stipulations from the theory.
From which theory? Because it's not within the argument.
Like the view that I'm taking is based on these things called truth makers and I suppose in the
What defines a
context I'm
truth
thinking,
maker?
like, what does the
Mm-hmm.
truth maker mean?
Yeah, I'm asking you, what defines truth maker?
As in, what does a truth maker mean? Is that the question you're asking me?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
In this context, a truth maker would be like some, like, I guess, metaphysically prior object or thing that enables another object to exist or be true or whatever.
Okay.
Something.
And when you talk about another object, are you quantifying overall objects?
I mean, I don't know what you mean.
So, in the set of all objects, right, which is going to be within the domain of discourse, which is embedded in the definition of truth maker, are going to be quantifying over all objects within that domain of discourse, or no?
Wait, hold on. Let me just write this down. Are we going to be quantifying over all objects
Look, your
in
current
respect to what?
definition entails a contradiction. So the reason as to why I'm asking you this
Can you tell me
question
the
is to not
contradiction?
just jump on the fact, yeah, because it is baked into your definition of a truth maker that God would require a truth maker. Because you're defining a truth maker to be the type of thing which allows for objects to exist. That would also include God. So that's why I'm asking you this question, because I don't want to just jump on the contradiction and just beat up on the points. I'm going to give you some mercy by asking you clarifying questions. Like if you're quantifying over all objects or just some objects in that domain.
Uh, if what you're asking me is, do all objects require a truth maker in order to exist? And like trivially, nah.
That's not what I'm asking you. So I'm going to re-ask you the question again. And I'm going to type out the definition this time. So when you say truth maker, what do you mean by the word truth maker there?
In this context, a truth maker is some object which allows for or gives the conditions necessary for another object to begin to exist or to be true or to obtain or something along those lines. That's what a truth maker is, under my view.
So that means truth makers are indispensable for objects to exist, given your view.
Not for all objects to exist, no.
So there are some objects which do not have truth makers, correct? You believe that?
Do you want to read the first argument where it says God does not require a truth maker for his existence? Like
Yeah, but the
secondary.
problem is within that proposition, it's going to be the type of thing which doesn't make sense if you're going to define truth maker the way you're defining it right now, which is going to be
No,
the
because
condition which allows for objects to exist.
no, it allows for some objects. The condition allows for some objects to exist. Yeah,
No, you never
that's
said
what.
some objects. You said objects actually, and then now
Yeah, but
changing it to
object.
some
There's
objects of
there's
the
no
recording.
there's no quantifier
Look,
there.
there's
You're
no
just
reason to
assuming
lie
that I'm
about your
using.
claims because it's very obvious I'm tracking
You're
the
just
conversation much
assuming. You're just
better.
assuming that I'm
I'm
using
not
the
assuming
broad
anything actually.
quantifier
You
when I'm
having a
not using the
cortisol
broad
spike. You need to
quantifier.
relax right now. Okay, you need to relax.
No, but
So
you're just
what I'm telling
assuming
you
there's a
here is,
quantifier there that's not being used.
there's some objects. So there's some objects which do not have a truth maker, of course, given your position. But you're defining truth maker to be the sort of prior condition which allows for some objects to exist. Correct?
Yes,
Okay. So to be clear on this, right? Are you saying that this condition is going to be necessary for those objects to exist?
like what that particular truth maker is going to be necessary.
So for any objects you believe which requires a truth maker or which is going to rely on the truth maker, it would be the case that such object is going to be the type of thing which is dependent on the truth maker, correct?
Yeah, in that particular world.
Okay, so what fact about those some objects you're talking about which has a truth maker, which would make it the case that those objects has a truth maker and God does not have a truth maker without circularly appealing back to the independent factor?
Wait, repeat the question again. You're speaking kind of fast.
Okay, so what fact, okay, about the objects you believe have a truth maker, which makes it such that those objects have a truth maker and not God, without appealing circularly back to the factor, which is God being independent given your definition?
And God does not. What fact about the objects you believe of a truth maker? Hold on 1 second, I need to sneeze. False alarm.
Holy shit, this guy is so
What
fucking
fact
slow.
about the story? What fact about the objects you believe have a truth maker that explains why those objects have truth makers and God does not? I just take a few
Yep.
facts about the essences of those things.
And the essence is going to go back to them being dependent? That's what you're going to say?
Uh, Not necessarily. It's just going to go back to what those things are.
So, about you specifically, you'd say that you're dependent, correct?
I would say I'm dependent. Yeah, but I don't think that's a fact of my essence.
And in virtue of you, like, what fact about you specifically which makes it such that you're dependent?
Uh, well, let's just get clear here. I don't think my dependency is a fact of my essence.
I'm asking you what facts about you would make you dependent, not whether or not dependency is a fact about your essence.
Like I, for example, depend on like oxygen to survive and stuff, like those sorts of things.
Okay. And so trivially, you'd say something like the universe would have some sort of thing it depends on, right?
The universe would have something it depends on. Yeah, I mean, you can say that. I'm not going to say that.
Okay. But you're agnostic previously on whether or not the universe is dependent, right?
I was
Remember
not
that?
agnostic on that ever.
I mean, you can lie about that, and that's fine. We have to the recording again, so just another blunder. So now you agree that the universe is going to be dependent on something else. Now, it's going to be the case that it's lending credence to whether or not you're still agnostic on if all things depends on God, right? God, if you believe God has causal power, and you agree the universe is dependent, that means it's not independent of God; it's dependent on God. Then what fact about existence is not going to be dependent on God, which would make it such that you're agnostic on the prop that God is going to be the type of thing which governs all things, you know?
I'm like, the reason why I said I'm agnostic is because A, I don't see how this is relevant, and B, I'm just not
Oh, it's
convinced by
very
any of the
relevant.
bullshit. I wasn't done. I'm like just not
I know you're
convinced
not
by the
done.
bullshit rationale you're giving for the position. Like
Look,
that's why I'm
look, I don't
saying
care about the motivation. So, granting that you conceded that the universe is dependent, right? That means all things in creation in this universe is dependent on something else, right?
no, I don't.
Granting
I
that
don't
you've
think.
already
I
agreed
don't
on
think
this
that's true.
proposition,
I don't think
then
that's
it
true.
would in fact be the
I don't think
case,
that's
right?
true. I
That
don't think
you
that's true.
believe that God grounds
I
all
don't.
things
I
in the
don't think
universe,
that's
included
true.
the universe itself, right?
I don't think that's true. That's like saying, given the fact that like your body is big and
Believe
like
that
your
you
body's
believe
the
that God,
size.
you believe that God caused at least
No,
some
no,
things
no.
in the
That's not what I was responding to. I'm saying I don't think the statement that given the fact that the universe is dependent, that means that all things that constitute the universe are also dependent. Right? That's like obviously false.
So you don't think it is the case that the things in the universe, right, for example, like the physical things which are made up of other physical things, are the types of things which are not dependent?
Just reword that question in a way that's like English and understandable to the
That is
audience.
definitely English. You're just way too much of a slow boy to even understand the points right now. You're thinking way too slow, which is why I have to type down words and you have to take long to formulate arguments. Not really a good
You
position to
just
be
sound like a
talking about
moron.
English because you're not that articulate, dude. So, look, I'm going to repeat the points one more time for you to understand clearly, okay?
Thank you so
So, what I'm
much.
telling you here is just relax, dude. It's okay. Right? I'm
Yeah.
here to help you out, anyways. So, I'm telling you right now that with respect to what you're talking about, with respect to something be dependent or not dependent, I take it to be the case that you're saying that there's some set of conditions by which, if those conditions did not exist, you'd cease to exist. So, you, for example, you need oxygen, and without oxygen, you'd not be alive, or something like that. And so you're going to take that to be the kind of dependency, correct?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, cool. So that means the universe and the things within the universe would all be dependent because all things in the universe are spacious and temporal. So by definition, they're going to require some space-time relations. All things in the universe.
Wait,
And
sorry.
you
I
believe
don't
that the universe
understand.
itself, which is space-time, is going to be the type of thing which depends on God. So the
I don't
universe is
understand.
dependent on God, and the things within the universe is at least dependent on something else. All things, at the very least.
I don't understand the inference, right? Like I don't understand the inference that because some things are spatio-temporal, that therefore they are dependent.
Not some things. All things in the universe are spacious and temporal.
Yeah, it's like supposing that's true. I don't understand the inference.
Wait, do you concede that all things in the universe are spacious and temporal, granting that they exist in space-time?
Yeah, that's just tautological, right? Because to be in the universe is
Okay,
just to be in
okay,
space-time.
okay. Good boy. So now you agree that all things are going to trivially be dependent on something else. That thing being the relations, which is space-time, which are independent of one another.
Wait, being dependent on the relations to what? I'm unclear. Can you be more vague?
The space-time relations. So the dimensions, which construct space-time, which is four dimensions.
No, but that's just to say that all things like look, I don't think space-time exists independent of the objects that exist within it. Like I don't understand what you're saying.
Okay. So just to be clear on this, could it be the case that any space-time object exists without the relation, which is space-time?
When you say without the relation that is space-time, I just take that to mean could any object exist in space without, being in space? And then when I think what is space, I don't think of
That's
space
what
in
I'm
a
asking.
Newtonian. Sorry, I don't think of
No,
space in a
that's not what I'm asking.
sorry. I
You're
don't think
addressing a
of
straw
space.
man. What are you
Sorry,
doing?
I don't think of
You
space
keep on
in a
apologizing
Newtonian
for
sense.
straw man
Okay,
my position,
I'll
but I'm
just
not
stay
making
random.
the
I'll just stay random.
apologies.
Go ahead.
You look, yeah. So you're just. I'm not
Stay
asking you
random.
that question. I'm asking you specifically. Is it going to be the case that you believe that there's this object which, given your viewpoint, is spatial-temporal, which could exist without the relations? Now that's nowhere identical to what the fuck you just represented my question
Yeah,
as.
if
Okay?
by without the relations you mean without other objects existing in tow, then obviously not. right? But I don't conceive of space in the way you're conceiving of space, right? It's not like they're
Okay, so
related
how
to
did you?
space.
I hold. Just to be clear on this, I don't hold to the view of space you think I hold to. By the way, I hold to a Platonic view of space-time, not the Aristotelian view.
I don't know what you're saying. What I'm saying is that when I think
The
of space, I
Aristotelian
think of
view treats
space.
space-time to be independent entities. The Platonic view does not.
Okay, wait. So when you say without the
I can
relations,
break this down to
and
physics
then you
term, by the
say
way. Like,
stop,
hmm
stop. When you say without the relations, and then you say the relations are space and time, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I don't think they're related to space and
they're
time. I
just
think they're related to. All right,
features of
yes,
the
just talk over
object.
me again. That's completely fine. Let's get on board.
So you're gonna actually just the point. You're gonna keep on straw man and then
I
shut the
mean, I already
box and then
answered your
misdirecting the
question back
conversation.
when Abraham walked. You're still talking about
But you
things.
said specifically that you don't hold to the same view of space-time that I hold to, despite me holding to an Einstein account of space-time and not a classical mechanical account of space-time, which is the
Okay,
view
but
that
then
you
if
hold
you
to.
do hold to that kind of
That
space
is
time, you
the
understand
problem.
it's false to say that objects are related to
I
space.
bet you don't know those views. Like you don't know the accounts of space-time. They don't know the distinction between classical mechanics and
You have
relativity
no
theory because you're a
qualifications.
retard.
You have
Just to log
no
correct. You don't know anything.
qualifications. You have no
Okay.
qualifications.
So wait, why were you saying that I hold to a different view of space-time despite us both holding to the position that space-time are relations?
Because of the fact
Was
that
this a button?
when I was trying to answer your question, you asked the question to say
Mm-hmm.
these objects are
You
related
sound
to
angry. What's
space.
going on?
To me,
Mm-hmm.
to say objects are related to space seems erroneous, right? Because space is not some independent existence. It's not anything over and above the other objects that exist are related to the objects that we're considering.
Wait. Just to be clear, you don't think it is the case that you could have relations which has other relations that they're related to, retard?
My nigga, what?
You
What?
don't believe that you can have a hierarchy of relations? You're always so confused. He's
I
lost.
believe you can have like a
It's the
relation that
first time
describes
he's ever
relations.
talked about
Yeah.
any specific conversation, but for a
Look,
lot of relation
I don't know
distinction
what
and
this is.
relation.
Look, I don't know how you're responding to what I just said. What I just said is that if you're
I
taking
responded to
space,
everything you just said, and you've been
I take
distracting everything I've been
space,
saying.
I take space
Mm-hmm.
to be a description of the relationships between objects that exist. Right? That's what I take space to be. Okay, so when you
Okay,
say they're
so just to
related
be
to
clear,
space,
that would include height, right?
that would include what?
Height, like height, length, width.
Yeah, those are dimensions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's literally what space is made of, by the way, in case you didn't know. And so, in the context of you talking about you as a person, you as a physical object, or so forth, you depend on those features, right?
I depend on what features.
The features, like the spatial features I just highlighted a while ago.
Well, if what you're asking me is do I depend on height, length, and width in order to exist insofar as I'm physical, yeah, I mean presumably. Because I'm spatially extended.
Okay, okay, cool. So, it is the case that an object can depend on the relations which are the dimensions, dumb fuck. Wow, it
No, but
just took you so
when
long to track that part.
no, when you talk about
That
depending
didn't
on the
work in your
relation,
favor, did it?
I wasn't I
Wow,
wasn't
dude.
I wasn't done. When you say depending
I
on the
wasn't done either.
relation,
You interrupted my point, and then you're gonna say
I
that you're not
wasn't
done speaking.
I wasn't done.
Go ahead and finish too. Uh huh.
Yes, like when you say that they depend on the relationships, if what you're saying is these objects have height, length, and width, for example, right? And that's what they're depending on in order to exist, then
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. But what I thought you were saying, because keep in mind, right, it doesn't seem to be obvious to me how height, length, and width are the same sorts of relations that I'm talking about when I'm talking about relations in space. When I'm talking about relations in space, I'm talking about like dyadic
Mm-hmm.
relations, relationships between two different objects. In which case,
Yeah.
right, I don't understand how that would be the same as talking about height, which concerns the same object, but just two different points on that same object.
Yeah. So you confused a couple of things. You thought that space, like spatial relations, are necessarily dyadic relations, or
No,
they could be
that's not
monadic
what I was.
relations.
That's not
So
what
that's
I
a blunder.
confused.
That was a blunder, and that's fine. And you're interrupted now, right? So that's kind of crazy, you know. So granted that you agree that you would depend on height, length, and width while you being human. The same thing would apply to Jesus Christ. But that's going to be incompatible with the proposition that you've said previously, which is that God is going to be the type of thing which is independent. You
Yeah,
think
I'll
you
respond
define
to
God to
that.
be dependent.
I was
That's the defining characteristic of God.
Yeah, so I'll respond to that once I respond to the thing you said about me blundering. I didn't blunder. I was saying that the way in which I was
Okay,
understanding space before is based on
wonderful.
the context of the conversation that we were having. The context
Mm-hmm.
of the conversation that we were having is when you talked to me about space, right? And then when I asked you what you mean by space and stuff like that, you said spatially extended. And I said, yeah, if you
Mm-hmm.
mean this, and I gave the view, right, about, objects existing in relation to other objects and stuff like that, then yes, I
Mhm.
think that these objects are physical. Existing in space, for example, is just to exist in relation to other objects. Blah blah blah. That's what I thought we were talking about. There wasn't a
Yeah,
blunder.
see, that doesn't
Obviously,
work. That
I
doesn't really
wasn't
work.
done.
But continue.
I wasn't done. I wasn't done. I have another point to
Take your
respond
time.
to. So
Go
yeah,
for it.
obviously I understand that space can be dyadic insofar as it requires one term, right? But because obviously I'm the one that brought it up, or monadic, sorry, insofar as it requires one term. I just didn't think we were using it in that context. And then secondly, in response to the point
Mhm.
about whatever you were saying about God, whatever, I think the argument you made just now was I said before that God is not a truth maker or something. Um, and then you said that Jesus is human, and so Jesus would have truth makers, and like someone that's a contradiction. You asked me, like, is that like the argument now that you're giving? Is that like where it's come to?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the reason why I went down all of this rabbit hole asking about your concept of omnipotence is to basically grant you or basically get you to at least agree on one of the things which I believe are necessary conditions for some given object to be omnipotent and for some given object to not be omnipotent. That condition being to be independent of all things. You've already defined God to be this independent object of all things, and then you agreed that while you possessing certain spatial properties like height, length, and width, you would in fact be the type of thing which is dependent on those properties. Jesus Christ was a human, he possessed the human nature, you agree that that entails physicality. So the same thing applies there. So omnipotence, under my view, just to clarify for you and the audience, is going to be something which is basically almost the same thing as just being independent of all things. And not omnipotent is just the latter, just the opposite. Now, your agreements in the conversation collapses back into you having to agree that, well, even though God specifically is necessarily independent, there's going to be the case that Jesus Christ, if you're claiming to be God, possessed the property called being human, which would entail the opposition to independence from all things, given the fact that he's a human and he possesses spatial features. So that kind of fucks your position, right? So I
I
think
mean, I
there's
don't think
nothing else to
so.
really be talking about, unless you have an objection, right?
I do have an objection. Obviously, I mean, this is like just basic logic problem of the incarnation. I think the objection is going to use terms like, well, not terms, but what's actually the term for it? I think it's like I would just say terms because I don't remember the actual term in literature. But if you use like the phrase insofar as to then liken the relations, which is used in like a lot of like popular relative identity pieces of literature, then there just isn't a contradiction anymore because the senses in which the predicates are being ascribed are completely different, right? And like if you ask any
Uh,
Christian, for example, do you
that
think
doesn't
I wasn't
work.
done? I wasn't done. If you
That
ask
doesn't
any
work.
Christian, for example, sorry, I wasn't done. If you ask any Christian, for example, like, do you think that Jesus Christ ceases to exist when he dies on the cross? They will tell you no, right? So then, obviously, when we say things like the human nature is dependent, or like the physical God, Jesus Christ is dependent, or whatever, you just add the phrase insofar as he was human, he was dependent, or something like that. Insofar as he was divine, he knew all things. If you said something like Jesus Christ is omnipotent, insofar as he was human, I would say, no. Insofar as he was human, he was not omnipotent, right? Because that's just not properly ascribed to the human nature. So if you use the phrase insofar as, there just no longer is a contradiction. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
The problem is simply that when you're going to be talking about dependent and independent, they're actually talking about the same sense, right? Because when you're talking about independent, you're talking about the type of thing which doesn't require anything else for it to exist. And when you're talking about dependent, you're talking about the type of thing which requires something else for it to exist. The only way it would actually be the case you're talking about it in different senses if it is the case that you're applying it to different contexts, which is not the case in the context of Trinitarianism. One example is if you say a judge is legally invulnerable, but a judge is also physically vulnerable, right? Now, of course, in that given context, vulnerability is talking about two entirely different things in the sense whereas in one case you talk about physicality and in the other case you talk about legality. That dog shit response is not going to work for the Christians here because in the case of independence and dependency, as we talked about in this conversation, we're talking about the same sense, which is going to be about metaphysics, which is going to be about existence and what is going to be required for a given object to exist. So it's not talking about it in different senses, it's talking about it in the same senses. It's not talking about different subjects, it's talking about the same goddamn subject, which would be God specifically, which you take Jesus to be God. So that objection does not work, see? Now, to land the finishing blow, to basically knock you out in the conversation for good, right? What I'm going to say here is simply that if you're going to claim that he possessed the human nature, you have to be saying that he's dependent insofar as he requires something else for him to exist. given what dependency has been defined and cashed out is in this conversation, and if you're going to say that God is God and you believe that God is independent as you already agreed on in this conversation, you have to be saying that he does not require anything for him to exist insofar as whether that would be the type of thing which would ground his existence. So we're talking about dependency and independency in the same sense, and we're talking about the same subject. So you're kind of cooked. That argument doesn't work either, but I precog the argument. I know what the argument is.
Uh-huh.
It's like you basically saying that, oh, Jesus is omnipotent qua divinity, but he's not omnipotent qua humanity, and so there's no contradiction because they're different senses, except they're not different senses because you're not referring to two different types and notions of omnipotence. We're referring to the same types of omnipotence, and we're referring to the same subject. So there would still be a legitimate contradiction, irrespective of whatever jibber jabber we're going to spout afterwards.
Okay, yeah.
You're baked,
So
dude.
just, I mean, I guess, I mean, just to respond, like once again, I'll just give an example that's like non-theological, from like a relative identity paper I read. I don't even know how long ago it was. But essentially, to give an example, like about this, I think it was about a Greek queen. It was something like the Greek queen, insofar as she's a mother, does not want to like kill her son, or does not want to kill her son. But insofar as she's angry, or insofar as something else about her features, she does want to kill her son. And then obviously, if we're going by Apollo's argument, insofar as we're talking about the same Greek mother, which I think her name was Medea, that's the same subject, quote unquote. Uh, we would ascribe
Shout out to
contradictory.
Val, by the way.
Okay,
Val,
okay,
shout out to Val.
okay. Anyway, insofar as we're talking about the same subject, according to Apollo, ascribing contradictory wants and desires and stuff like that, and so there would be a contradiction. Like obviously, that's not what we would say. We would just say that she desires these things insofar as we're considering different features or different parts of her, or different features of the being who we're being considering, whatever. And so in the same way, there just isn't a like I don't understand how you can say it's the same subject that's what's in question. I don't really care about the intentional context, which is what you're trying to say when you say it's the same sense. I'm talking about senses in what are we actually referring to when we're talking about these things. Whenever we say things like Jesus Christ knows all things, for example, we're not saying he knows all things insofar as he is human. We're saying he knows all things insofar as he is divine. And as long as we make that qualification, the predications themselves are being made regarding two different things, right? Two like different things, obviously. And so there just isn't an issue. And then if you say something like, oh, well, like, you know, like I actually don't know what you would say. I think you were saying something like, what I'm saying doesn't work because it's the same subject. I think I already
Mhm.
responded to how that's just a confusion.
Look,
Um,
look, look.
hold on,
So,
I'm trying to think what else you said because I like was half focused
okay,
on
dude,
something.
take your time.
I think yeah, I mean, like what else is there to really say? I mean, I think I already outlined to you how in the relative identity view there just isn't an issue with what I've been saying. Um, and if you want to say something like, okay, well, we still have to make a claim overall, like we have to make a claim overall about what Jesus Christ knows, what Jesus Christ doesn't know, whatever, blah blah blah. I would just say that it's indeterminate till qualified, right? So that you can have like like a three valued logic, where you have things that are indeterminate, super true, super false, and if you know about these things, hopefully you do. And like you can have something that's
Why
true
are you
given
even bringing
some
up supervaluationist logic? What the
yeah,
fuck is this
because
guy
obviously
rambling on
I
about?
wasn't done. I wasn't done. Keep in mind I've let you talk. So yeah, it's also
Okay,
10:40,
dude.
so I don't want to be overtalked. But the reason why I bring up supervaluationist logic is because given some specifications, something can be true. Given other specifications, something can be false. And insofar as those specifications are not made, it would just be indeterminate. And so if you say something like, okay, well, I have to make a position, just unqualified, does Jesus Christ know all things? Is Jesus Christ dependent? Blah blah blah. I would just say it's indeterminate because given some specifications, he does know all things, right? And given other specifications, he does not know all things. For example, um, and so that would be my response. I think we can conclude probably, hopefully.
Are you done? So yeah, so that argument isn't going to work. So insofar as the precisification thing is going to be concerned, it is not going to be the case that we're talking about a big predicate. When you're talking about independent or dependent, that's been clearly cashed out. As for example, dependence is going to be the type of thing which indicates that something requires something else for it to exist. And for independent, we're talking about the type of thing which doesn't require anything for it to exist. Now, that's not going to be the type of thing which is vague predicate. In supervaluationist logic, when they're going to be requiring precisification, is going to be applicable towards terms like tallness, you dumb fuck. So like if I say Bob is tall, because people have so many different usages of the word tall, you might have to cash out tall as 6'3" or above, or 6 foot and above, yada yada yada. And then as you cash out the concept, we're going to have a super truth or super falsity. That doesn't apply here because independence and dependency are not big freaking predicates, you retard. So you brought up supervaluationist logic for no reason and are getting clipped on that topic too. Now to respond to the other part of what you're talking about, if we express the proposition that we're talking about in first order logic, it would be specifically O of J, whereas the constant J represents Jesus Christ, and not O of J, which is going to be not omnipotent, and that's going to be another predicate, or which is going to be applied to Jesus Christ himself. And if you apply the conjunct logical operator there, that's going to, under all models, be the type of thing which is contradictory. So it's not going to be satisfiable under any fucking model. Now, you're going to want to say that for it to be the case that there's no contradiction, it has to be the case that when I'm talking about omnipotence in one sense, when the predicates in omnipotence in one sense, I'm talking about omnipotence as in being powerful and so forth. Let's say let's just use the definition. Let's say we define omnipotence as just being more powerful than all other objects, right? If I define omnipotence as that, right, and then I have the negation operator omnipotence, and I mean by that something completely different from that definition. That means I'm not applying the negation towards that sense of omnipotence. Then it would not be the case that there's a contradiction. However, in this case scenario, when I'm talking about omnipotence, or sorry, independence and dependence respectively, it's going to be the case that what we're talking about there are the same goddamn thing. We're talking about the same sense. We're using dependency in the same sense, right? Which is whether or not something requires something else for it to exist. And all I'm doing when I'm talking about independence is just applying the negation operator beside the predicate, which would be dependence, right? So not dependence would be independence, and yeah, whatever. So it would be about the same type of dependency. For the arguments you're going to give to actually work, it has to be different senses of dependency. So for example, the judge case of given. A judge in a court case, they're legally invulnerable. They're the one who is controlling who wins the court case. They're not the one who's a suspect or making any sort of like accusation. They're the one in charge of the legal case. They're legally invulnerable. So they're invulnerable in the sense of legality, but they are vulnerable in the sense of them being a physical object, right? So the vulnerability predicate there means something differently based on the context, right? It has a different meaning, right? Now, in the case of humanity and divinity, respectively, you say that God is going to be the type of thing which is going to be omnipotent or omniscient in one sense, right? In the sense of him being divine, and Jesus Christ is going to be not omniscient in the sense of him being human. That's not going to work there because it's not going to be the case that the senses of omniscience is changing over time, but rather you're trying to index that predicate to a directly opposing property, which generates a contradiction under any single interpretation function, right? The argument does not work. I've already seen this argument already. I've foreseen this argument, right? So your position entails a conjunct of O of J and not O of J, right? Whereas that in all specific interpretations will entail a contradiction, and so it would in fact be the case that it satisfies the condition for a position to be a contradiction.
Okay, I mean, my response is going to be shorter because I just don't think there's that much more to say. Look, in response to the first thing about supervaluationism, the reason why I brought it up is because it's directly relevant to the sort of dispute that I'm having with your view, which is that you're trying to say there's a contradiction with me saying that Jesus Christ is independent because he's God and dependent insofar as he's human. However, obviously, right, those things need to be qualified, right? So it's not correct, IMO, to say that Jesus Christ is dependent insofar as he is God, because he isn't dependent insofar as he is God. Also, you were saying stuff like it only works when talking about vague concepts. I think that the notion we're speaking of is vague. So I agree with you that tallness is vague because people have different conceptions of what it means to be tall. In the same way, I think that this concept is vague because what we're talking about can literally be true or false depending on what someone is meaning when they talk about Jesus Christ being dependent or dying or having knowledge, right? Depending on what you think these things mean and what you're referring to specifically, these can be different. For example, if you look at any of the early church fathers, they're going to say that Jesus died on the cross, but they're not going to say that the divine nature died, right? So when they say Jesus died on the cross, they're obviously not referring to Jesus insofar as he is the divine nature. They're referring to maybe Jesus insofar as he is an organism. The organism died or something along those lines. And that's what they're referring to when they say that Jesus died. And since God is the organism in some relative sense, You can say through like this communication of, you know, properties or predicates or whatever, that God died, but you wouldn't say the divine nature died in that way. That's why there's a need for qualification. That's why there's a need for being more precise with the language that we're using. The language models you're talking about, where you give like the FOL or whatever it was, wasn't really listening to that. I already explained how you might be able to show that there's a contradiction without using the RI, but if you use the RI, it fits intuitions that we have about conflicting properties. For example, the case with the mother. I'll just give like another similar case. Maybe, for example, I get a job opportunity over at like, I don't know, the city, but I live in the village, I live in a rural area. And like, insofar as I want to be successful, I want to go to the job. Insofar as I don't want to leave my family, I want to not go to the job, right? And like, obviously, under your view, we're talking about the same subject, which is me, right? And so if we put it into the language model thingy, Bobby, we're talking about, we're going to get this contradiction that is, under your view, false under all interpretation functions. But most people would say, actually, no, like having a conflict of emotions and having a conflict of desires is something that majority of human beings experience throughout their whole life. And it does not mean that you're like a logical impossibility that's just walking and talking somehow. What it actually just means is that when we're talking about you wanting and not wanting to do something, it's insofar as some other thing is true, some other feature of your identity is true or concerned. And so when you just say unqualified, I want to do this thing, or I do not want to do this thing, that's not true or false, right? It's in between, it's indeterminate, because you haven't made the qualification necessary for us to evaluate the truth of the proposition. The independent stuff that you were talking about can also be considered vague, right? Because, for example, you might say that Jesus Christ is dependent insofar as, you know, he requires food, he requires, you know, drink, oxygen, sustenance, whatever. But God isn't dependent in that same way. And so you could also give an example where you say, because of these terms being vague, you also would require the qualifications and stuff. To be honest, I don't really see how this is like such a difficult thing to understand. The view that I'm positing doesn't seem to be ridiculous. What I'm saying is that you can qualify predicates such that there is no longer an issue, because the predicates themselves are referring to different things. And insofar as there is no qualification made, you can't really make a claim on what's being said. Like most people would say, you can't just say Joe is tall is true without knowing what tall means, without knowing what tall is referencing, without knowing the context which Joe lives in. Because maybe the context which Joe lives in determines whether he's tall or not. In the same way, Jesus Christ died, for example, needs clarification. What would you mean by died? What particularly are you referring to? Do you mean died as in the organism? If you mean died as in the organism, then sure, Jesus Christ died on a cross. But obviously that wouldn't refer to the divine nature, because the divine nature is not an organism, right? Absolutely speaking, it would only be identical, relatively speaking. And so maybe I'm missing something, but I don't know how long ago this conversation began. And to be honest, it wasn't really interesting. So I kind of contradicted myself because I said I'd leave if it wasn't interesting. But yeah, we can conclude.
Yeah, so just to respond to a couple of things. So the how I basically point out the contradiction is pretty clear. So you see in the side chat, I point out the different types of vulnerability. So the reason as to why in the case of the judge, for instance, there's not a contradiction is the meanings of the words is actually different. If you actually, as you say, use some sort of precisification to make the concept clearer. So in the case of invulnerable, that just means not being subject to laws, not instead of not being subject to anything simplicator or not being affected by anything simplicator. And in the case of vulnerability, it means not being subject to physical effects. So they're talking about different things, even though they use similar wordings for the negation operator with the predicate and the affirmative operator, or sorry, the affirmation of the predicates, right? Now, in the case of the independence and dependency, it's not the case that there are different meanings, which would make it the case that the predicates are actually talking about two entirely different things. When we start to cash out the concepts and apply precisification there, it's actually talking about the same thing, even after we assign or we utilize precisification system. Because independence just means not requiring anything to exist, and dependency means requiring at least one thing to exist. Right, so those are going to necessarily contradict each other, right? No matter how much semantical baggage or semantical clarification you're going to require there. Case of what you're talking about in the case of you having conflicting desires. You say to yourself, conflicting desires. So there's desire A that points towards action X, and desire B which points towards action Y. That's not going to be a contradiction because you're not ascribing the predicate of wanting action X to the same fucking desire, you dumb fuck. So that was a blunder. That wasn't even an example of there being some sort of non-contradiction, which under my view would be a contradiction. You blundered again. That argument doesn't apply here because you believe that Jesus is God, right? Whether you believe it to be true under Peter Gee's relative identity or under some absolute identity framework, it's irrelevant. You believe that Jesus is God. So that means it's going to be the case that you're going to be predicating this one property to this thing which you believe to be God, as well as the negation of that same exact property to that exact same subject which you believe is identical to the thing being talked about. That's going to always result in the contradiction. The case of you having conflicting desires will not ever result in a contradiction because you're necessarily talking about two different desires which want two different things. So not only is it the case that the object within the language is going to be different, that means you're talking about two different objects, desire A, desire B, but you're predicating two entirely different predicates to the fucking objects. You're predicating wanting action X to object A and wanting action B or wanting action Y to object B, which is desire B. So the predicates are different, the objects are different, so there will never be a contradiction. It's like affirming P and Q. That's not a contradiction. In the case of what you're talking about here, the object, Jesus Christ, across both propositions are the same, and the predicates, right, which is being independent and not being independent, are going to be talking about the same goddamn thing. It's talking about the same thing across both propositions, except with one proposition, you're applying a negation operator, and in the other proposition, you're not applying a negation operator. So when we express this in first order logic, what we get here is, let's say O omnipotence is identical to independence. So O, you're going to talk about X, or sorry, O of X, which is just going to be X is omnipotent, which is just to say that Jesus Christ is omnipotent. And then you're going to have the conjunct symbol, and then you're going to have not O of X, which is just to say that Jesus Christ, which is going to be represented by the object variable X, is not omnipotent, which is just to say that it is in fact dependent and not independent, and that's going to always result in a contradiction, right? This is basic logic. And again, you can't apply the qual predication stuff because the only way it evades the contradiction is if it is the case that the objects of both propositions are different, or the predicates of both propositions are different, excluding the negation operator. If I exclude the negation operator when I say that Jesus Christ is not dependent, which is to say that he's independent, and the proposition Jesus Christ is dependent, they mean the same thing. The only thing which distinguishes the proposition Jesus Christ is independent and Jesus Christ is dependent is just the fact that there's a negation operator that would be applied to the first proposition. The very fact that there's no other distinguishing features entails that the senses and the respects by which you're applying the predicates would be the exact same way. So this argument is trash. It's garbage. And I agree with you. It's a waste of my time. It's an uninteresting conversation because we're just 1 hour of me educating some British retard who doesn't know how logic works and doesn't know how metaphysics work and can't even distinguish his positions properly and contradicts himself over and over and over. I agree. It's uninteresting. If you have any last responses, you can give the last responses, which I assume is going to be another sort of blunders, or you can save yourself the embarrassment and then the conclusions right now, and we can just have this on the recording and just end this garbage shit show of a debate.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably take this to be a quasi conclusion because I'll probably like maybe respond to some of the other things you said, but it's not going to be anything that's crazily radically different from anything I've said before. First thing you were talking about was, I'll just go based on what I remember. I was like trolling with Hodge and chat. The desires thing, I mean, I don't know why you like try to say I have a desire A that leads to action X. I have a desire B. No, that sounds like jihadist. Wait, I have a desire A. No, I can't do it, but I'm sorry, man. Your accent is too golden. But basically, you were saying something like, you have a desire A that leads to action X, you have a desire B that leads to action Y. You just know how I cashed it out. In the example I gave regarding the person that has an opportunity to go to work in the city, he has a desire to go to the city and he has a desire to not go to the city, right? It's like insofar as he wants to stay with his family, he does not want to go to the city. So he has a desire A that leads to not X. Insofar as he wants money, he wants to go to the city. He has a desire B that leads to X, right? So A leads to not X, B leads to X. Are we going to say that I'm now like a logical impossibility? I'm like walking around with like contradictory predicates. I mean, most people wouldn't, right? What they would say is something like, I mean, we're talking about what you want to do in reference to different things. We're talking about what you want to do insofar as different conditions are being considered. or being, quantified over. And that's what I'm saying. Whenever we make statements about Jesus Christ, we're talking about Jesus Christ insofar as some things are concerned. Next, you were saying stuff like, the independent stuff was like, I don't know, not vague. It means the same thing. In your legality example versus the, human example, the judge is, legally invulnerable, but he's like mortally vulnerable or something, I guess, to summarize what you were saying. I agree that that's like a way in which you can understand what I'm saying, like layman. But that doesn't mean that's the only way in which what I'm saying makes sense at all, actually. Especially because the dependency versus independency that's being referenced is not in the same sense at all. And I'll just elaborate a bit on why I don't think it's in the same sense. In the sense that we say that Jesus depends on things, we're saying he depends on things like sustenance. We're saying he depends on things like, I don't know, water and food and oxygen and sleep and things like that. And so what's really being dependent, what's really standing in that relation is the organism, right? The organism, Jesus Christ, is standing in that relation, and the set of properties that are ascribed to the organism, particularly. Uh, and so when we're talking about that, when we're making that specification, obviously the dependency is in a different sense to this sort of more robust metaphysical dependency that we're talking about, where we're saying if an object fails to exist, this object just does not exist at all. If Jesus stops breathing or something, or Jesus stops eating or something along those lines, he would still exist. Jesus dies, he also still exists, because what's being referenced when we're talking about death here is not the divine nature, but rather human nature and the organism. And so the dependencies mean something different, and also the dependencies refer to something different. And so I somewhat agree with the analogy you gave regarding legality and mortality. It's just going to be the case that it's not exhaustive, and there are other contexts where it makes sense what I'm saying. You're also saying stuff like we're ascribing the predicate to the Jesus person in the model. I mean, like I said before, it's just going to be indeterminate. It's not going to be a fact of the matter until we make the specification. And so, similarly to how you say Bob is tall and Bob is not tall might appear to be syntactically inconsistent, it's only really syntactically inconsistent once we consider what's being referenced, right, and what's really meant by the terms, or what's being referenced by the terms. Like another example you might give is like, I don't know, the human soul is immortal, right? But the human body is mortal or something. I don't know. Like there are like plenty of examples I can think in my head that just outline what I'm saying. But like once I say again, like this is not anything radically distinct from anything I've been arguing for the past like 20 or so minutes now. It's pretty much the same thing. I'm trying to think of any like closing remarks. I mean, the conversation wasn't all that interesting at all. I agree with you on that front. And it also does matter what logic you're taking, because there are some things that would be inconsistent in FOL that are consistent once formalized given relative identity, and certain phrases that you would adopt when analyzing something given relative identity. That's like obviously trivial. So I think we could probably like wrap this up here. Probably. I don't think there's anything else to say. Unless I forgot something, which I don't think I did. So
Well, just the last straw man. I mean, just a couple of things. The case of like the conflicting desire stuff. Again, you're talking about different objects which are specified. You're talking about different desires, which also happens to be features of a particular composite object, i.e., C, the person, or any particular person in general. In the case of what you're talking about here about Jesus Christ, we're not talking about different propositions. I'm saying Jesus Christ is independent. We're talking about Jesus Christ. We're talking about Jesus Christ, the same subjects, right? It's the same object, Jesus Christ, in both propositions, right? So it would not be the case that that logic actually applies there, because then again, if it were to be applied there, you'd have to be saying that you're talking about two different objects when I'm saying Jesus Christ is omnipotent in one sense, or omnipotent in the first proposition, but he's not omnipotent in the second proposition. So you'd have to be committed to some retarded view, like there are two instantiations of Jesus Christ, right? And you're not going to want to say that, right? You're going to want to say that the being that was fully human was in fact God, irrespective of him possessing human nature. That's not going to be something you're going to want to say. So you're going to have to agree the objects are the same, unlike the case scenario where the example you've given will not be emblematic of an object remaining the same across both propositions, which would be the proposition and the negation. So that doesn't work in that given case. Nothing else worthy for addressing. And yeah, you just fucked yourself, man. You just cooked. So for the guy recording, you can end the recording because my phone is at 2% anyways, and I gotta go. So yeah, that's basically it.
Well, I just found this server.
Where's the jihad?
DM me for the person who's recording. DM me right now. Let me know if the recording is finished.
Like, well, if this debate is finished now, I guess we can speak normally about stuff. I'm asking. This is for the Muslims, right? I was watching. I'm a Christian myself, but this is in regards to like Islamic economics. I'm pretty sure that Muslims are like pro free market and pro private property. So is it like haram to be a communist in Islam?
It's disbelief to be a communist in Islam.
Yeah.
It's not Islam doesn't necessarily aim to just support free market. I mean, there is regulation that is introduced. It's just the
So-
idea is that you